Before this video begins, I would just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. Here's a statement you might struggle to believe. Looney Tunes almost destroyed Doctor Who. True or false? Well, to quote Gallycab's quiz night, it's Dugger true. Due to Doctor Who's strong legacy and constant cultural presence, it has had a lot of strange and unexpected encounters. From Ridley Scott almost designing the Daleks, to Steven Spielberg being involved in the development of the 1996 TV movie, you'd be surprised how deep the rabbit hole goes. I mean, hell, even Jeremy Corbyn was gifted the spin-off movie Sealing the Devil Seeds of Arador, creating a very surreal image, akin to French President Emmanuel Macron busting out a Blue Eyes White Dragon card. Yes, this is real. It's not photoshopped. You're welcome. But perhaps one of the weirdest and least known sagas in Doctor Who's long and complicated history is how one Looney Tunes box office bomb almost completely killed modern Doctor Who before it could even begin. So buckle up, because things are about to get a little bit loony. On December 5th, 1901, in the small and picturesque Hermosa neighbourhood of Chicago, the course of history would forever be altered with the birth of one Walter Elias Disney. The fourth of 5 children, Walt would grow up full of creativity, developing a passion for drawing above all other things, besides maybe trains, that is. This love for drawing and the arts would lead Walt to the emerging animation industry, of which his titular company would soon dominate as it helped to usher in the so-called golden age of American animation. But it wasn't thanks to Walt alone. From around 1928 to the mid-1960s, American animation, like Disney's productions, were hugely successful. Whether that was Mickey Mouse, Betty Boop, Popeye the Sailor, Casper the Friendly Ghost, or Tom and Jerry, there was an arms race to dominate this industry. But one of Disney's biggest competitors was Warner Bros., founded in 1923 by 4 brothers, Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack Warner. Unlike Walt, these brothers originally focused on live-action films, releasing successful films like Where the North Begins, The Marriage Circle, and Beau Brummel, establishing Warner Bros. As one of the most successful studios, impressively going toe-to-toe with the much more powerful studios of MGM, Paramount Pictures, and First National. With the live-action side of things still prospering, Warner Bros. Turned its attention to the emerging phenomenon of animated cartoons, publicly releasing the first Looney Tunes cartoons throughout 1930, featuring Bosco the Talk Ink Kid, the first Looney Tunes mascot, but certainly not the last. Looney Tunes ran successfully from 1930 until 1969. Growing bigger and bigger with the introduction of characters like Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, and especially Bugs Bunny, who made his debut during the 1940s and helped make Warner Bros. Arguably the most dominant studio for animated shorts. Between 1944 and 1964, Looney Tunes saw its own golden era, winning 5 Academy Awards and further diversifying its wide array of colourful characters. However, from 1969 to 1979, no new shorts were made, since the extensive back catalogue was now being syndicated on television, along with the format of theatrical short cartoons simply dying out. This television presence only made Looney Tunes more popular and recognisable, growing in profile year after year until 1996's Space Jam released, combining the wacky and colourful cartoons with live-action characters in the same vein as Disney's Who Framed Roger Rabbit nearly a decade prior. Space Jam wasn't considered a particularly good movie, seeing a baffling storyline, even by cartoon standards, of aliens fighting the Looney Tunes characters in the form of basketball, allowing classically trained Shakespearean actor Michael Jordan to shine as the central protagonist. Despite its narrative quality, Space Jam was a huge success financially, so naturally a sequel was in the works as soon as possible. But I'm not talking about goddamn Space Jam 2, the absolute sin on humanity. No, I'm talking about something called Spy Jam. The original Space Jam 2 would have seen Michael Jordan and his animated friends return to face a new alien villain, but Jordan hadn't actually agreed to appear in a sequel, so the idea was scrapped in favour of Spy Jam, with Jackie Chan set to star, but this too was cancelled. Eventually Warner Bros. Approached director Joe Dante with Looney Tunes Back in Action, which Dante wanted to serve as an anti-Space Jam and better honour the legacy of the Looney Tunes characters. But ultimately, according to Dante himself, he had no creative freedom on the movie and hated the experience. Back in Action released in 2003, featuring the Mummy star Brendan Fraser during the height of his initial popularity. The paper-thin storyline saw the Acme Corporation trying to turn Earth's population into monkey slaves through the use of a diamond, creating a globe-trotting spy adventure with all sorts of questionable jokes and strange moments. As a young kid, I loved it, but there's no doubt it doesn't hold up to that kind of childhood nostalgia. Unlike Space Jam, Back in Action was a complete bomb, coming nowhere near recouping its $80 million budget and causing Warner Bros. To cancel a number of projects attached to it. Ironically, it really was the anti-Space Jam, with better critical reception, but the complete opposite financial performance. But I know what you're all thinking. We're about 5 minutes into this video, and what on earth has this got to do with Doctor Who? Much like Looney Tunes, Doctor Who is a franchise with a long history, beginning as a quaint sci-fi show in 1963 and growing into a worldwide phenomenon by the time it was softly cancelled in 1989. However, even with this cancellation, it was still a cultural juggernaut, and relevant even during its so-called wilderness years, during which Space Jam and Back in Action released. During this period, there were a number of revivals pitched, from a Fox-produced American reboot show to a cartoon series by acclaimed studio Nelvana, which, by the way, made a video about. Go check it out. There were many attempts to resurrect the show, and these all fell apart for one reason or another. However, as early as 1998, TV writer Russell T Davies had been meeting with the BBC to discuss a potential TV return of Doctor Who, which ultimately manifested in a formal approach in 2002 and an official commission that same year, paving the way for the show's full return in 2005. Seeing a more Americanized drama approach taking inspiration from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, gritty and grounded yet suitably campy 45-minute episodes rather than the 25-minute episodes of classic Who. And it goes without saying that this was a huge success. But Series 1 very much could have been dead upon arrival because of one potential omission: the Daleks. And to tie it all together, it was all Looney Tunes' fault. Looney Tunes Back in Action sees its protagonists travel all over the world on their adventure, but one sequence in particular places them inside the fittingly titled Area 52, a facility obviously similar and parodying the real Area 51, featuring aliens like Marvin the Martian imprisoned. This scene is just one of the many chaotic and bombastic scenes in the movie, but it's notable for its particular cameo of the Daleks. It makes sense after all to feature such an iconic sci-fi monster. It's perfect foil for such a cameo. But this simple short cameo almost completely ruined the plans for Doctor Who's revival because Warner Bros. Asked the BBC for permission and it was granted, despite the BBC not actually owning the rights to the Daleks. You see, Classic Who has some complicated rights, to say the least. Again, I've made a whole video about that. Since the writers of each serial owned the rights to whatever monsters they created, which is why independent films like BBV's Auton movies, Downtime, or the infamous Zygon movie are all able to exist because the BBC weren't the ones with the rights to the monsters, so they could be used with the original writer's permission or licensing. Despite their notability, the Daleks were no different. Created by Terry Nation all the way back in 1963, the Daleks belonged to the writer, something that had proved problematic as early as the 1960s when Nation wanted to create a spin-off for his monsters, only for the BBC to refuse, leading to him trying to take the Daleks to American studios instead, leading to the monsters being written out in Evil of the Daleks. Even when Nation passed away in 1997, his estate retained the rights to the Daleks, so their appearances in things like Back in Action should have gone through his estate rather than the BBC. The BBC had been permitting their use in a number of productions, but Back in Action was by far the most notable and caused significant friction with agent Tim Hancock, causing the monsters to be completely dropped from Doctor Who's 2005 revival, despite them having been planned as a major return and symbol of validation to legitimise the show. Arguably one of the standout episodes of 2005's Series 1 is Dalek, seeing the dramatic return of the villains in one of their most destructive and thrilling episodes as one single Dalek becomes an incredible threat. But because of the dispute arising from Looney Tunes Back in Action, Russell T Davies and writer Robert Shearman had to explore alternative options for this marquee Base Under Siege episode. Davies had already been envisioning a new monster for a future series if Series 1 proved successful enough to continue the show, a floating orb known as the Sphere, humanity's final form of evolution and a sadistic creature. Given the scenario he found himself in, and a lack of time to really explore many alternatives, Davies decided to replace the Dalek in both this episode and the finale with this Sphere creature, almost completely changing the trajectory of Doctor Who in the modern era. Ultimately, everything panned out successfully, with the BBC reaching an agreement with Hancock to use the Daleks after all, and the Spheres would go on to become the Toclophane in the Series 3 finale. But for a crucial 5-month period during 2004, Looney Tunes almost cost Doctor Who its biggest and most important villain. So, for the sake of hypotheticals, what would have happened if the agreement hadn't been reached? So, cast your minds back to 2005, if you were even alive. That is. Goddamn, I'm only 26 and I feel ancient sometimes. Doctor Who explodes back onto screens and introduces the 9th Doctor and Rose as they battle Autons, a bitchy trampoline, gas zombies, and big green farting aliens. And then, halfway through Series 1, the episode Creature of Lies airs. It's a little darker, our main characters intruding upon a secretive bunker owned by billionaire Henry Van Statten, featuring a collection of alien artifacts and one living exhibit, the Sphere. We find out that this deadly floating orb is the thing of the Doctor's nightmares, responsible for wiping out his entire race. Without the iconic Daleks involved, the episode would be much more character-based, since Shearman couldn't rely on the Dalek's star power for his script anymore. Van Statten would also have been much more villainous, and eventually would have been killed by the Sphere. But on the whole, the episode would largely have been the same, but with a Toclophane rather than a Dalek. However, the finale would be much more interesting, because the dispute was resolved quickly enough for Davies to not need to rewrite much. But how would Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways work with the Toclophane instead of the Daleks? And would Doctor Who Series 1 have even succeeded with that replacement? Part of the success of Dalek and the finale is the restoration of the villains as a threat, whilst also legitimising the show because of how synonymous the Daleks are to Doctor Who as a franchise. The mere announcement of the Daleks not appearing because of the dispute was enough to cause a media frenzy and public outcry. So a lack of the Daleks within the show and its marketing would have definitely had a big negative impact on Series 1 and its cross-generational appeal. The Toclophane appearing as the big bad in the series could have still been effective, but would enough people have even tuned in for Series 1, knowing the Daleks would be absent? Series 2 was already commissioned without needing Dalek to prop up the middle of Series 1, but without the success of that episode and the finale, I don't think Doctor Who would have had the staying power it ultimately did end up having. The Toclophane are interesting and visually distinctive monsters, but by the time they were actually used, they weren't even a significant part of their own story, playing second fiddle to the Master in the Series 3 finale. I don't think they would have been compelling enough to carry Parting of the Ways by themselves. A huge part of that finale being so beloved is the specific presence of the Daleks and how terrifying they are as an overwhelming force. The perfect use of the show's history to usher in a new generation. The Toclophane would just never be able to replicate that kind of connection or threat level. And we have historical precedent for that. As I mentioned earlier, in the 60s, the Daleks were killed off due to Nation wanting to take the monsters in its own direction away from the BBC. It was a huge hit to the merchandising appeal of Doctor Who, so an attempt was made to create a new marketable monster in the form of the Quarks. Small, non-humanoid robots with childlike voices who made their first and only appearance in the largely forgettable and unimpressive The Dominators. Ironically, the copyright situation with the Quarks was actually even more messy than with the Daleks, and this attempt at creating a new monetizable monster ended in failure. A fate which would have no doubt befooled the Toclophane too, had they been the replacement for the Daleks in Series 1. It should go without saying that both Dalek and Parting of the Ways would be significantly worse with a brand new monster attached, and I think it would have had a severe knock-on effect for Doctor Who in the long run. Without the legitimacy and proven historical success of the Daleks, Series 1 would have struggled significantly. Even if Series 2 was able to serve as their big dramatic return, it most likely would have been too late to properly re-establish Doctor Who as the cultural juggernaut it ended up becoming in the 2000s. The Daleks are just that important for the show, especially when it came to such a bold attempt to bring Doctor Who back with an already bare-bones connection to its past. Fortunately, we live in the timeline where everything worked out well, and the Daleks indeed made their explosive return to critical and commercial success in Series 1, proving their importance as a central part of Doctor Who's ecosystem, a level of significance the Toclophane could never hope to replicate or mirror in their place. And so, thanks to Looney Tunes, of all things, the 2005 revival of Doctor Who very well could have been short-lived or even outright dead on arrival. That's all for me for now. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez, my Diamond level patrons, Sapphic Flame and Valtar, and all my Gold level patrons, Chris Douglas, Daniel Shillito, and James Aleula Waterhouse. Thank you for supporting the channel.